Welcome to Live from Lockdown Library, presented by Bookworm Goa, with your hosts Nayan and Anandita. This is a series of conversations with book and library people where they share their responses to the ongoing global crisis. We're talking social distancing from a community perspective, we're talking access to books and storytelling, but in quarantine. The hope here is to find ways together to reimagine the library, to think of it as a vital, evolving, transcendent space that can both hold and give voice to this moment of intense uncertainty. Presenting live from Lockdown Library.
Hi, I am Nayan, a library educator. I will be your host for today's episode of Lockdown Library, where we will be speaking to Jo Chopra. Jo Chopra is the co-founder and director of the Latika Roy Foundation based in Dehradun, Uttarakhand, that provides specialized services and support to families and children with disabilities. Jo is a committed writer, a passionate reader, and a peace-loving human being. We are honored to have Jo with us today. Good evening, Jo.
Good evening. Lovely to be here.
Thanks for joining us today in Lockdown Library. So, Jo, today we will be talking about many things related to lockdown and how it has affected libraries. So, as you must have also experienced since the lockdown was announced, we have been confined to our homes and the internet, and you must have seen explosion of online story related content, be it storytelling, webinars, podcasts, and many other such activities. What do you think about this sudden abundance of online content in the field of library work?
Well, I think we often find that crises bring out the best in us, that people find innovative ways to confront restrictions and difficulties. And this is a great example of that. I think that where previously we were expecting children and parents to come to us, now we realize that we have to get to them. And so we're using technology in the best ways possible. But I also think that the crisis has encouraged parents to do the same in their own homes, because technology is great, but it does have its limits. And if this is inspiring parents to pull out those books and tell the old stories, families are sitting together in the evenings and just chatting the way things used to be. And I think that that's also a great response to the crisis. It doesn't always have to be through organizations, through a sort of structured approach, but it can also bring out the storyteller in each one of us, and giving parents the chance to just read books or tell stories from their past, from their childhoods. These are also great responses to the crisis, and I think we're seeing a lot of that.
And we have also observed that many of our library partners, field organizations, committed literacy groups, and others engaging with relief work, maybe they feel that that is what they must do because it is of urgency and relevance. What do you think about this in light of a vision for libraries?
Well, I do think it's important as human beings that we reach out and we support the relief efforts in whatever way we can. I'm not sure that it's a specific task for library-based organizations or organizations that are working directly with children. I think these are just human responses, and they really don't have that much to do with our organizations. Where I think our organizations can really play a role is in helping children to make sense of what's going on. And we're using stories to great effect with our children. We anyway use stories for children with autism, for children with developmental disabilities, because that's the easiest way they find to understand life around them. And so an extension of that has been to explain to children the importance of social distancing through stories, to explain hand washing and why it's so important through stories, and to explain why you're not getting to go to school, why you're missing out on your playtime in the park, or why you can't meet your friends. We tell them stories to help them understand it. And this is a natural extension of what we have always done, because that's just the best way that children understand things.
Can you share one or two ways how you are reaching to children during this time?
So all of our child-related staff, so the therapists, the special educators, the child development aides, they're all making regular phone calls to families to check in on how they're doing emotionally, how their mental health is, and not just the child, but also the parents, the other members of the family who are interacting with them. So that's a regular feature. Every family gets at least 1 or 2 calls a week. And then if we see that there's a problem, then we do a follow-up call through the counselors and the social workers. That's a kind of general taking the temperature of the family sort of an initiative. But then in addition, we have a regular program that the family is following now at home. And so we want to check, is the child able to meet the goals that were set? We've had to redo all of our, they're called IEPs, individual education programs, to acknowledge that this is a different situation. So the goals have been brought to a slightly more less ambitious level, because we recognize that parents are not experts, that they're working maybe for the first time with their child in this way. So we've tried to tailor the goals to the situation. And then we check in with families regularly to see if they're able to meet those goals. And if they are, then we make them a little bit more difficult for the next week. If they're having difficulty, then we scale it back. So these things are happening regularly. We're also doing, we have one of our programs is an after-school program for children, and we have a leadership council. So that leadership council is meeting every week through Zoom, and there are about 8 members of it, youngsters in there from around age 10 to around 14. And they have a regular meeting where they discuss ideas for things that they can do themselves at home, sending messages to the other children in the club. They did a whole Eid Mubarak initiative. They're looking at various things that are coming up as, the regular calendar. We're trying to maintain that the way that we would if they were meeting in person. So lots of phone and Zoom and video and WhatsApp chatting is going on a regular basis with all of our families.
So, Jo, this is a quite testing time for us in many ways, and it requires us to examine our own vision and area of work, whom we want to work with, why, how, and such. How does this apply to the work that you have been doing?
I think what we have found most testing is not the scope of our work or the people that we want to work with, but how are we going to sustain this now, given that the economy is going to collapse in the next few months, that we're going to see an enormous decline in philanthropy for these issues, and philanthropy is largely going to be directed to immediate relief. So we've done a lot of discussing amongst ourselves about how we can scale back, how we can cut our budgets. So we have successfully managed to cut our budgets by 50% by all of us taking voluntary pay cuts, asking our landlords to decrease our rent, getting rid of anything that's a bit luxurious, like staff development, like training, like travel, and just focusing on how we can do things in-house and at a very low cost. So it's interesting to see the creativity and the skill that people have. We're used to buying everything that we need. We are used to having everything professionally done. And now we're rediscovering our own hidden talents and our abilities to sew, to draw, to paint, to make up stories, to do all the things that used to be kind of second nature, and particularly in NGOs. We were very used to a bare bones, streamlined budget. And now we are, by the gravity of this situation, forced to come back to that. And it's difficult, but it's also very empowering to realize how much you can do for yourself and how much families coming together and staff coming together with a united vision can actually make our organization stronger, make our staff more resilient, our families more empowered. Parents are finding resources within themselves that they didn't realize they had, the skills that they have just because of the force of circumstance being forced to tap into. So it's very inspiring. And I think the crisis is bringing out the worst in us and bringing out the best in us. And we are always trying to veer toward the best.
Thank you so much, Jo, for showing such a positive side towards it. So, Jo, has any library activity struck you as particularly mention worthy in this time?
Well, I'm in Chicago, so my experience with libraries is now the American library system. You know, it's not specific to the Indian context, but what the Chicago Public Library is doing is making all of its, it's extremely easy to get a card online. You don't have to go and sign up. You don't have to prove anything. You just sign up and they give you a library card. And then you have access to audiobooks and ebooks. And they are trying to make them all as easy to download as possible. I'm finding audiobooks for me have been a real godsend. I listen to stories on my walks, and I just find it's a completely different dimension to a book. I'm reading a lot more than I normally do in this time, but because you need exercise, I really enjoy the experience of hearing a book read by somebody who's really good at reading. So I think that's something that Indian libraries could consider doing as well, making audiobooks available. Even if they are not in a format that can be downloaded, people can tune in and listen to somebody who reads well, reading out stories that are popular to a wide range of people. Other libraries are, they have a skeleton staff that's working in the library, though it's not open, and they're taking requests from patrons through email, and then they actually post the books to people. Now, I don't know if this is something you have to pay for, but if Indian libraries could do that, I don't know what the situation is now, or deliveries being allowed or not, but once they are allowed to do that, I think it would be a fantastic service if, and it's something that I want to consider in our small library in Dehradun, that we could send packets of books to the families so that children had something interesting and new to look at home. In fact, because of this program, I started looking at what libraries around the world were doing, and that was something that struck me that we could do, because we are allowed out in Dehradun for a few hours every day, and we could make deliveries like that to families.
My another question to you is, like, you shared about reading, that you're reading a lot these days. What has given you strength and purpose during this time?
Well, I listen to podcasts a lot, and there's one that I've found incredibly helpful. It's called Backlisted, and it's a podcast out of England, and their tagline is bringing new life to old books. So they take books that were once popular that they think should come back into the public eye, and they do a whole episode on a particular book, and they have the two of them, and then they have experts who come in and talk about the book. And it's just a really delightful approach to reading and has widened my palette so much. Now, I had a fairly predictable stable of authors that I would go to regularly. I tended to read the same sorts of things. And when you get introduced to a completely different genre, it's so mind-opening. And I really recommend people experimenting at this time. Try poetry if you've never read poetry. Try drama if you've never read drama. Try an author from a country you've never experienced before, and get a sense of how the world works for other people, other cultures, other ways of looking at things. If you're, stuck with all the great masters who are all almost always men, try reading books by women, try reading Indian authors or Chinese authors, and that this kind of something about this crisis is allowing us to try new things. I think we're just more open to experimenting, and I'm finding that a great different way of looking at the world and making sense of this incredible time that we're all living through.
Jo, my last question to you is, we trust that many of our listeners are library workers and library educators. Do you have a thought or message that has been illuminating for you?
Books have just been my lifeline all my life, but really especially so right now. And I think library workers should be in that band of essential workers who get special passes to get out and do what they do, because the concept of a library in itself is just so wonderful. And I think library workers should see what they do with great pride and kind of a visionary, messianic approach to it, that every child should have access to a library, and whatever it takes, we have to get books to children to help them get through. I mean, this is a crisis right now. There will be new crises as they get older. So when they have that foundation, that books and literature and stories are what get us through the most difficult times of our lives, I think they will be better placed to cope with whatever comes their way.
Thanks a lot, Jo, for sharing your thoughts and experiences. It was indeed our pleasure to host you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for doing this. I think your work is just fabulous. I'm so proud to be part of it.
This has been an episode of Live from Lockdown Library. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.